Nash.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to support this bill, the Taxation, Annual Rates, Trans-Tasman Savings, Portability, Kiwisaver and Remedial Matters Bill. Quite a mouthful there, no doubt about that. Another one of those debated under urgency this session that was started under Labor. But having said that, it's supported by all in the House. It's a sensible bill and goes a long way to just clearing up a few areas and making it easier for people to understand tax matters. The main provision of this bill, as has already been mentioned, is the introduction of changes to the tax rules to allow New Zealanders returning home from Australia or Australians deciding that this is really the best place to live in the world to bring their retirement savings with them, and for New Zealanders to take their retirement savings to Australia if they decide that the land of no clouds, severe water shortages and a million Russell Normans is better than God's own. It also includes a number of technical changes to the rules surrounding Kiwisaver, gift duty exemptions and binding rulings to improve the way the rules work and to reduce compliance costs for taxpayers. Regarding retirement savings portability, as mentioned, this is a sensible arrangement. We've been told that there is potentially $16.6 billion in lost contributions from New Zealanders working in Australia that under this scheme would come back to New Zealand. And even if a fraction of that money was to come back home, Mr Speaker, it would have a positive impact. And when you consider how the country has been hollowed out to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of the finance company collapses, then any money that can return this way in the form of savings is more than welcome. And of course, Australians know how to save. Mr Speaker, as my colleague David Parker alluded to, the Australian superannuation scheme is light years ahead of the New Zealand equivalent. That this government keeps comparing itself to Australia is a little strange, if not downright disingenuous, all things considered. This national government has ultimately, Mr Speaker, undermined its commitment to New Zealand super. We had the Cullen Fund, Mr Speaker, which was designed as a top-up to the government's national superannuation, and this government axed contributions to it. Since this decision was taken by Mr English, the Cullen Fund has since gone on to make a small fortune as the global equity markets have recovered in the wake of the global financial economic crisis. Then we have Kiwisaver. Around 1 million Kiwis have taken this scheme up. Actually, who developed Kiwisaver? Ian Lees-Galloway, do you remember? Was that a Labor government? Yeah, of course it was. I think it was a Labor government. Because these 1 million Kiwis view it as a vital part of retirement savings, planning for their future, which is what the scheme was set up for. The one difference between the New Zealand scheme and the Australian scheme, well, one of the major differences, theirs is compulsory. And we once had a compulsory superannuation scheme whose architect was Sir Roger Douglas when part of the Kirk Cabinet. And it was visionary at the time, only to have it removed, illegally as it turned out, by Prime Minister Muldoon. Which government? National, I think, yes. Imagine, Sir Roger, it's good to have Sir Roger sitting in the House because this really was a visionary piece of legislation. Imagine, Sir Roger, what our economy would look like now if your super scheme had continued like the Australian scheme, set up at about the same time, into the 21st century. I think this economy would look quite different now if Sir Roger's scheme had continued. As David Parker also mentioned, the Australian employers will soon be obliged to pay 12% of an employee's salary into the fund that invested in local and international infrastructure, as well as a huge number of other local and international investments. And I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I do believe it is now one of the largest superannuation funds in the world right now, and growing. And this government cut employer contributions when the Australians are increasing theirs. It's quite interesting. Anyway, Mr Speaker, back to the bill. The key provisions of this Act. We've got the Trans-Tasman portability of retirement savings. The portability arrangements will allow retirees who have retirement savings in both New Zealand and Australia to consolidate them in one account in their country of residence. These amendments give effect to an agreement between the Minister of Finance and the Australian Treasurer made in July 2009. These arrangements are expected to come into effect during the second half of 2010. These amendments only cover the transfer of retirement savings between a Kiwisaver scheme and an Australian complying superannuation fund regulated by the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority. By that I mean it can't be your private super scheme, it's got to be the Kiwisaver one. A member must permanently immigrate to Australia and supply proof of their immigration to the provider. To protect the value of the savings, transfers of savings between New Zealand and Australia will be exempt from any entry or exit taxes. For permanent immigration to a country other than Australia, the current rules for transfer and cash withdrawals will apply. However, if a member permanently immigrates to Australia, the following new rules will apply. This is a member of the scheme, not a member of this House, Mr Speaker. Well, a member of this House if they want to go as well, or want to go back home, I suppose. A member will be able to transfer all of the Crown contributions. Their member tax credits will not be recovered by the Crown. Retirement savings may not be withdrawn in cash, and a member must transfer the full amount of their savings and not a partial amount. The requirements for proof of permanent immigration to Australia will be the same as for permanent immigration to other countries. A Kiwisaver member can request to transfer their savings any time after supplying the provider with proof of their permanent immigration to Australia, and fees charged by Kiwisaver providers on the transfer of retirement savings to Australia must not be unreasonable. Imagine the investment sector being unreasonable. I can't imagine it. Can't imagine why that would need to be put in there. Anyway, Australian rules will provide that New Zealand-sourced retirement savings may not be transferred from Australia to a third country. The following rules will apply to funds transferred from Australia into Kiwisaver. A person who is retired may withdraw their Australian-sourced retirement savings at age 60. A member tax credit up to $1,428 per year will not be paid on contributions to Kiwisaver schemes consisting of Australia-sourced retirement savings. Australia-sourced retirement savings may not be withdrawn for use for the purpose of a first home, diverted to a member's mortgage repayments under the mortgage diversion facility, or used to count towards eligibility for deposit subsidy. Australia-sourced retirement savings may not be transferred to a third country either. Now, I know this is rather dry, but what we need, this is quite an important bill because there's a hell of a lot of people in Australia who want to come home, and I think it's important that we outline some of the reasons why we're doing this and some of the practical measures. But when that member over there starts jumping up and down about speeches, I have to ask, what planet is he on? He's the man who introduced 3 strikes. What a load of bollocks that was. The current, back to the bill. Is there someone talking? Is there a noise somewhere in the House? No, anyway. The current eligibility of individuals to streamline and consolidate their personal retirement savings has led to some individuals paying multiple fees for the administration of their retirement savings account. These costs undermine the effectiveness of policies aimed at improving retirement living standards. Also, the ability to transfer savings is one factor individuals take into account when considering employment opportunities on either side of the Tasman. The Australian Superannuation Minister has indicated there is around $13 billion, and I mentioned this before. That's about $16.6 billion in lost retirement accounts from many small retirement savings accounts of New Zealand workers in Australia. Under the status quo, an individual may transfer their Kiwisaver savings to Australia on permanent immigration, but Australian compliant superannuation funds may not be transferred to Australia. Mr Speaker, there are a number of other provisions in this bill. I'll leave it at that because this is a very good bill. Mr Foss acted as a good chair of the Finance and Select Committee. We received some very good advice from the IRD and the bill and some good submissions as well. It's a good piece of legislation, and so I commend it to the House. Thank you.